Hey guys, Prometheus back here yet again with another episode of Risk, Reward, and Fire. Glad to be with you as always. Before we get started, I need you guys to like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications. And so what are we looking at today? Well, a lot of blood on the streets, that's for sure. Seeing kind of a bit of a liquidation cascade this week. I touched on it in the Discord, what I'm kind of looking at in the markets, how am I seeing potentially bottom formation occur over the next few weeks heading into Q4. Let's jump on into it. So again, just a little bit of a sell-off really largely this entire week. Altcoins are definitely getting beaten down. Finally, they held up relatively well over the past previous 2 weeks. If we look at total 3 ES BTC chart, I've touched on quite a few times on these episodes, but you can clearly see over the past, really month, altcoin outperformance has been relatively strong for the past month, and we're finally starting to see kind of overall, market dynamics fall in line here, headed into Q4, which is indicative of a healthy correction, a healthy bottom. We're finally kind of starting to see some of the complacency and the leverage get rinsed out of the market, and I think a lot of people are a little bit too early to call, tops here, quote unquote cycle tops. We had a print this morning, obviously GDP coming in at 3.8%, beating expectations of 3.3 or priors of 3.3. Also, initial jobless claims beating expectations as well, coming in, I think, at 212, expectations 230. So we're very much so still in a, strong economic growth regime in the broader markets. But here locally, kind of what are we looking at? So I want to touch on ETH here. And this has been a level that I've marked out for the Discord for quite some time now. You are coming back down into finally this very, very strong demand region, right? This green box. We have had a lot of these longs come out of the market, and we just wicked underneath 4K here locally speaking. And from a psychological perspective, what are a lot of people going to be doing from a positioning standpoint? For whatever reason, people like whole numbers. When we talk stop losses, take profits, people give general market outlooks, they always are giving whole numbers, and that usually translates into positioning as well. So, what we saw on ETH and with this leverage rinse coming down into 4K, and why is it a targeted region? A lot of people are going to be longing here for some form of breakout. They could be targeting the 1618, fib extension here at 5,700. And most likely, from a psychological perspective, they're going to be saying, okay, I'll put my stop loss, underneath, at 4K, right underneath 4K, and we're never going to go back there again, right? That's safe. And market makers are going to be targeting that, right? They're going to be targeting that mentality. They're going to be targeting those larger positions that are positioned as such and very much so complacent in the market. When you get people thinking that their positioning is safe, typically what then ensues is some form of, stop hunt. And that's exactly what I believe we got over this past week. I look at this, you talked about complacency in the Discord. We had some nice shorts on Solana, Doge, and Pengu, printed on those. But, am I looking for shorts here? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is not the position to be looking for shorts. I look at where we're at, RSI shaping up really nicely here on the daily, and we're kind of entering the lower bounds of the move. That to me is a strong signal that probably the majority of this downside has taken place thus far, especially with the decorrelation and the decoupling we're seeing from crypto in regards to broader markets, right? The weakness that we've seen from crypto has been real. We've seen equities continue to chat higher, continue to go up, and crypto really just roll over here over these past few weeks. And so when you see that kind of decoupling, and it's not necessarily when it's a isolated event, particularly to this sector in particular, it more leads me to the fact that this was a stop hunt. This was some form of market manipulation by the market makers. And now we're seeing some culmination coming to fruition here over the next few weeks. And I am looking for longs here, long positionings here over the next few weeks. From a psychological perspective, and it's something that I'm going to touch on and harp on a lot this this episode in particular, is a lot of people have it very, very backwards, where you see big capitulatory events, everybody gets worried. They don't look at it as a buying opportunity. They look at it as, I'm down X amount on my portfolio and I should be looking to exit because I'm worried that it's going to go lower. And they get stuck in the psychological loop where then when we're back up at the highs, they're looking to buy and yada, yada, yada. The cycle continues and they aren't able to grow their portfolio because they're getting rinsed. This is a very good buying opportunity. You talk about coming back down again, like I said, sweeping, retesting this previous all-time high, sweeping the lows here, getting all the leverage out of the market. This is a strong market maker demand level. You have an inefficiency here. Wrong one. You have an inefficiency here as well. So could this go a little bit lower? I do think that you could see this potentially head just a tad bit lower here over the next few weeks, like I said. Now, I will say that even if we get some form of larger flush in the broader markets, that is likely a very good opportunity to be buying and scooping projects that you think are going to deem are going to do very well heading into Q4. So I look at RSI, we're entering the lower bounds. Let's look at stablecoin dominance. I touched on this in a video, I think 5 weeks ago. The structural similarities and kind of how this looks and how we shaped up, and we're now coming up into it and expecting some form of bounce out of this region now. Like this should be some form of topping structure, be put in, from the structural similarities. I marked out, you have a divergence here at the lows, divergence here at the lows. Liquidity gets come back down, take the liquidity, exactly what we did back here. And then you're just really shaping up for the final move that's pushing up into the high time frame supply region, the point of interest, which is where we're at here currently speaking. And, what we saw back in June, which, you could potentially see something shape up, but I'm looking for something a little bit different, which I'll get into, but is some form of topping structure ensuing. In June, what we saw was a wick up into this high time frame supply region, the shoulder, the POI, and almost an immediate retracement on the daily candle. Look at the high long wick that we have here on the daily candle, followed by a bullish or bearish engulfing candle rather, that led to a really nice rally off the lows in the broader markets. Now, could we see something like that very similar where we leave some form of high wick within the supply region? Yes, you could. But I'm expecting for probably some form or more of a form of a distributive top within here that will then lead to lower prices or lower on stablecoin dominance, which would lead to higher prices in the broader market. RSI here on the daily entering into the upper bounds, very similar territory to where we're at on this high in particular. Just some things to be looking out for. I look at a lot of the projects that I'm very bullish on. I touched on Avantis last time on the last episode. Another name that I think is going to do very well in Q4 alongside Stable, Aster, Kita. A lot of the fundamental RWA projects, in my opinion, are just no-brainers here moving forward. And so I want to, if I understand the fundamental value and I see them at discounted prices like they're at, it's really a no-brainer buy here headed into Q4, like I said. So something very interesting as well is hype. Hype to me is kind of getting obviously a lot of backlash alongside the broader market, but it's been compounded with the whole Aster trade and CZ taking over. But if you have a project that fundamentally is very sound, the devs execute at a very high level, and they understand that, okay, their protocol might be lacking a little bit, they're probably going to be looking to innovate and expand said protocol. So, discounted prices here on Hyperliquid, you could potentially see 32 to 35. That would be a really good opportunity and region in which I would be looking for bids to get filled. Now, everybody on the timeline from a social sentiment perspective is bagging on Hyperliquid. If you look at Pump, for instance, very similar dynamic, which just recently occurred before it had its very strong run up. You can't take away from Hyperliquid that they're one of the top revenue generating protocols in the sector. And I don't think they're necessarily going to be going anywhere. The ability that they've had to execute at a very high level is not going anywhere. And because of that, this will still do well alongside Aster, alongside Avantis, alongside some of the other RWA names headed into Q4. and is still worth a, is still a buy in my opinion. You get those really negative social sentiment dynamics on tickers in particular. And if they still have a sound fundamental narrative and thesis, there's no brainer buys when they get those in those discounted regions. So looking at hyperliquid here, I would target $32 to $35. Solana, what could I see out of Solana here? Solana maybe has a little bit more to give than Ethereum to the downside. Like I said, could you see further downside on altcoins as stablecoin dominance continues to put in its topping structure? And then you look to come down into your market maker demand regions, you get into your quote unquote, lower boundaries on RSI, on the daily. Yeah, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. I could see, potentially 190 out of Solana. But in my opinion, in Q4, heading into Q4, if you currently have long positionings, spot that is, I'm not looking to like exit positionings like this is over and altcoins are just rolling over and they're going to get bludgeoned and, the list goes on and on and on. Let's look at total 2ES, for instance, something that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. You had the high time frame daily divergence. And, where could we see this come into? Marked out here on the chart is your high time frame demand region, right? This would coincide with a broader pullback in equities, in my opinion. 1.1 trill to 1.15 trill. You did have the divergence here, sweep of the all-time highs. Market makers, of course, wouldn't be nasty enough to do that now, would they? God forbid. But just looking at total 2ES here, and we're currently within this demand region. But what I would expect potentially is some form of retracement, and that retracement is retesting the sufficiency of the move. When you have a big expansionary move like this, typically those remain intact when it comes to divergences, and you don't get the full retracement back down to the low between the highs set by the divergence. So where could I see it come back down into? Potentially a sweep of 1.22 trill. That would be a very, very, very good opportunity within the market. Now let's look at the VIX and the broader market. The VIX to me does look like it wants to see some form of higher prices here, locally speaking. But if you look, and I have it marked out here for you guys on these trend lines set down here. If you look at the VIX back, before April, we were in an expansive regime. And what I mean by that is you can see structures clearly trending higher. And then we got the blow off into April, whereas where we're at is very much so compressive in nature. But here at the lows, RSI peaking back above the 50 level, this kind of ramping structure getting put in here locally. We did reject off of the supply region. Does it look like it has potentially a pop higher left in it? Yes, you could see, 20, and if things get really nasty up into 24. But if you're presented with that, that would most likely coincide with the RSI getting into the upper boundary. And if you look at when it gets into the upper boundary, particularly on the VIX, that's generally marking a high time frame top on the VIX and a high time frame low on broader markets. So very much so want to be cognizant of that. That would coincide with, a little bit lower potentially on some of these altcoin charts and Bitcoin and Ethereum, but the bottom is closer than some may suspect and some may think. Now, if you guys got some alpha out of that, I would appreciate you guys follow me over on X at Prometheus_1. Give the BB YouTube a subscribe, guys. Give us a follow. Give this a like. Retweet it. Do whatever needs to be done. Make some noise. Presenting a lot of alpha here for you in regards to the broader market, especially when the rest of the timeline is just completely bared up at the wrong time. We had an opportunity to be bared up, and I was cautious at the highs. We took some short positionings, and those played out very, very well. Now it's looking for buying. Now it's looking for bids to get filled. It's looking for buying opportunities in the broader market. One of those names being Chainlink here. Chainlink to me is very, very, very strong. It's indicative of a chart that's going to do well in Q4. You look at this high time frame structure. You're finally coming back and retesting this $20 region. RSI looks like it has a little bit more left to give, again, coinciding with potentially a little bit more of a pullback in the broader market. But it's still, like I said, nothing that I'm, being, panicking over in when it comes to the broader market. So we are very much so still in a growth regime. People are screaming recession. People are screaming it's over. People are screaming cyclical top. And I think they're going to be wrong based off the charts I just showed you guys today. Strong structural trends, healthy bull market pullbacks, retesting previous highs, RSIs looking like it's floored, stablecoin dominance looking like it's putting in a carbon copy of what it did earlier this year. What are we talking about, right? What are we talking about? So looking very, very good here. I like what we're seeing. One of the newer coins that I'm very, very bullish on is Stable. I think it fits into the whole RWA narrative heading into Q4 very, very, very well. Something to look out for. I'm not going to get into the fundamentals behind it here just so I can keep it nice and tidy and short for everybody. But Stablecoin, another one to look out for. Avant is obviously doing very well. A little bit of a pullback. It's a newer coin. It's going to experience a lot more volatility because of the lack of price history, right? Massive fluctuations between sell side liquidity and buy side liquidity, right? Not as quote unquote stable. But right, when you're prospecting these newer plays, you have to expect volatility. You have to expect that there's going to be broader pullbacks. And you're going to have to sit through potentially even 60 to 70% pullbacks to realize those, 50Xs, those 100Xs. That's what it takes. So that's what I'm seeing in the markets, guys. I hope you guys got a lot out of this. I hope, again, going into the end of the week, you guys enjoy your weekend. And with that being said, Prometheus out.